Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is an awesome artist that has worked at studios like BioWare, Bethesda, and Naughty Dog on franchises like Dragon Age, Uncharted, Last of Us, and Starfield. She is now the co-founder and CEO of Near Studios and is working on their upcoming game, Hawthorn. I'd like to welcome Heather Cerlan. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. So just as a bit of an icebreaker, you were in a rock band called No Jet Left, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything from your time in a band that has actually proven useful in game development or in your role now? And did you get to perform at any of your game release parties?
That's a really good question. I haven't really made a connection between the game development side and playing music. I started playing drums since I was 11, so it's just been a part of my life since I was very young. And I've never played at any kind of game launch party or any event having to do with any of the games I've worked on. Seems like there might be an opportunity. Um, but I'll say that I think that there is a bit of this kind of like creative release for me anyways. Personally, when I play drums, you get kind of in a flow state. And back when I was doing art, I would get in a similar flow state if I was just like on my you know Cintiq sculpting or something. I could get into this flow, and like time would just kind of like get sucked away. And I look at the time and I'm like, how have I been doing this for like an hour and a half? Like, and it just feels like it's been maybe 20 minutes or something. So um I can't say that there's any like direct connection between playing music and my game development career, as lame as that sounds, but maybe I have some goals now.
Yeah, maybe. And at Hawthorne's release, maybe you can get the band back together, play some drums.
I'll have to do more hand percussion though. I think that would be more appropriate for the tone and theme of Hawthorne.
One quality that I admire about you is your persistence, right? Because you wanted to work at Naughty Dog for quite a while and you kept pestering them to get a job there.
Yeah.
Early on, right?
Yeah. Let's see. I feel like the first time I applied was right out of school. So I graduated from Full Sail, and what was it? No, summer. I want to say it was summer of 2006. Wow. I'm like coming up on 20 years here. That's crazy. That milestone just snuck up on me. I had just finished school. I went to SIGGRAPH, which is a CG convention that happens. They kind of changed the location all over the country, but the one that I went to at that time was in Boston. And I went to the job fair, and I ran into Candace Walker, who was their, kind of their. I think she was the only recruiter at the time. And I met her and had a couple different long conversations with her because I kept going back. It was a multiple day event, so I would go back and chat with her. And apparently, I made a decent enough connection, or like I guess relationship that I built up with her, that a couple years later she remembered who I was, like specifically because I had addressed every single cover letter to every single like recruiter that I could find. So like their name was actually on the cover letter, and she was like, "That's wild. I've never seen this before." She's like, "How did you find this information?" I'm like, "I don't know, the internet." And so I think that kind of like stuck with her. And then years later, I applied, because she said at the time they didn't hire people out of school. So she was like, "Go get a few years of experience and then come back and apply, and let's chat." So a couple years later, she reached out to me while I was at Mythic Entertainment, before it kind of got pulled under the BioWare umbrella. And she asked if I'd be interested in doing an art test. I was like, absolutely. So, yeah, long story short, I basically applied to Naughty Dog, I think like 4 times before I finally got the role. And so, it definitely was persistence. Like basically every year I would try again. And then on the 4th try, I managed to get the role as a texture artist at Naughty Dog, which, was my dream company. I grew up on Crash Bandicoot and Jack and Daxter. And then when I was in college, I would play like multiplayer Uncharted with my brother. And that was like how we stayed in touch. And then, yeah, that was kind of just the like, for me personally, I thought that the environments and the art that they created for Uncharted 2 was kind of at that point set a bit of a benchmark for the industry. And so I was just always really drawn to Naughty Dog. And so when I finally got the job, I was like, super excited about it. um, and then my first role coming right out of, like starting at Naughty Dog was on The Last of Us, the PS3 version. They hadn't announced the game, but they had released that trailer. That there was like a teaser trailer that was kind of looked like it was live action. And it didn't say anything about what the game was. It was just this weird random video that was like black and white and had like the virus stuff growing and like people walking. And it was just like, okay, they're clearly teasing something, but we didn't know what it was. But it's a new IP is kind of what I had taken from that video. So when I joined and started on that project, I was really excited.
Did you have any imposter syndrome at all, or were you able to just get into the groove straight away when you started there?
To say that I had imposter syndrome was an understatement. I just like floored. I was like, how the heck did I get here? Like, this is crazy. Like, I should not be here. I actually literally I joined, and like 2 weeks goes by. Like, somebody walks me over to my my computer, and they're like, all right, here's here's your desk, here's your station, here's the paperwork that you need to like get through all the stuff. And I sit down, and like 2 weeks go by, and nobody, like, not a manager, nobody checks in on me, and I'm like, did they forget that they hired me? Like, I'm really not supposed to be here. I'm pretty sure nobody actually like knows that I'm here and that this is all, this was all a big mistake. And when I'm pretty sure it was either Adrian or Jeremy that I asked, like, hey, no one's really come over to like check on me, because it might have been Adrian actually. I was like, I don't like, what am I supposed to do? Like, am I supposed to check in with somebody? Or they're like, no, if no one's like over at your desk bothering you, then you're doing everything right. Like, that's like a good thing. I was like, oh, okay. And then that's just kind of how I operated after that. It's just very autonomous. You get to kind of just, plan your day to day. You didn't have like a producer or anybody over, like looking over your shoulder, like tracking your schedule or anything. It was just like, do whatever you need to do to kind of unblock your, your strike team that you're working with, and all is well. So that was definitely something that took me a while to get used to, coming from, from EA being, much more micromanaging. So the idea of just being left to my own devices was a very strange shift. But once I got into it, it was like, okay, this is actually really cool.
And then did you have to adjust in your head how it works at Bethesda? Because I imagine they're more a quantity over quality sort of thing, whereas Naughty Dog would give you the time you need to polish something, right?
Yeah, it's definitely very similar mindset, I would say, to EA than Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog was definitely like an anomaly in that matter. So when I joined Bethesda, I had to get back into that groove of working closely with producers, and that studio is very production driven. They have like, producers over like sub disciplines, and so there's a lot of like work that you have to do to kind of get your schedule managed by a producer, and there's not really a ton of like ownership in your day to day. You just kind of get assigned whatever needs to be done, and you tackle that as a task, and then mark it when it's done, and then the next one kind of rolls down. And even within the like the day to day of, you get assigned a task. If there's a bug or something that comes back with that particular asset, they don't even necessarily reassign it to the artist that originally made it. They just give it to somebody, like whoever happens to be available. So you would often be opening up other people's files and going in and trying to figure out like what the issue is, and you don't have any familiarity with the way that that person set up that file. And even when I joined, they had multiple exporters. So if you didn't have the right exporter, it became really challenging to export everything out with all the same settings without breaking it. So eventually, and that was part of the big push that I did there, was to help streamline some of the workflows so that the getting an asset to where it's made and then into the engine, that would be simplified and streamlined as much as possible, and continue to improve on that.
So how long did it take you to kind of get into that groove and into that mindset after being at Naughty Dog for so long?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think it was just kind of a gradual fall into it, but I still think I kind of struggled with it. Although I will say I was in a more unique scenario than I think most of the artists there at Bethesda. I was specifically hired to put together uh, essentially a layered material pipeline for the artists. So I was one of the only artists or anybody at the studio that had used a layered materials system. That was, it was essentially what we had, something similar to what we had at Naughty Dog. They knew that they were in the process of rebuilding the renderer for Creation Engine. They were wanting to rebuild all these new systems across gameplay, art, engineering. They were going through and updating the engine. And so part of my role there was working with I mean, I think over the span of time, it was maybe 15 to 16 engineers that came on and off that particular project. But it was building an entire layered material system from scratch that all the artists across all art disciplines would end up utilizing, everything from characters to environments to VFX, and kind of building the foundation for that with engineers, and then working with the leads from each of those sub art departments to make sure that their needs were um, met and considered while we were building out the foundation for that. So I I operated kind of outside of the typical production chain, just because that was this kind of, I don't know, one-off strike team that existed. And for the longest time, they didn't have a producer working on that strike team, but I still would have to kind of coordinate with engineering producers to make sure that if there was some issues or a new feature that needed to go in at that time was getting scheduled. So I still had to kind of even though I may have not been my role kind of mapped into the typical production chain within the Starfield production, I still had to kind of work around it. And that was one of the things that they sold me on. They're like, we know it's going to be different coming from Naughty Dog because we heard that you don't have producers, which is crazy. Here we're going to have producers, but you're going to, it'll be a little bit different. So, I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely an adjustment for me, but I think it gave me a really good balance of kind of understanding where teams are most effective, where you can put a little bit of structure and pressure, but the kind of underlying philosophy being that, developers have autonomy over what they're doing.
What do you find is similar or different between, say, the Creation Engine versus the Naughty Dog engine?
Oh man, that's a hard one. I mean, Bethesda's engine is specifically created for big open worlds, right?
Right.
Streaming in lots and lots of data. Unreal Engine initially was not built that way, and they've been trying to add tools and create systems that allow that to happen. And they're still pretty early in their infancy, and you know, they're they have their issues, right? So I think what Unreal is trying to do is add systems that bring it closer to what Bethesda's engine does. But, Bethesda's engine was built from the ground up with that kind of workflow and that type of game in mind, whereas Unreal is, at its core, a shooter engine. So, from an architecture standpoint, very, very different. But the Unreal is trying to get closer to that philosophy of open world games, being able to stream large amounts of data in and out seamlessly. So it's getting there, but I would say that Unreal still has quite a ways to go on that side of things. And then Bethesda's, I think their strengths are really where like designers don't need to know how to program. Like they don't have to be programmers. There's just like forms that you fill out that you kind of link together in certain ways that create, functionality that they need. Whereas, if you're even with like any kind of, like node-based uh, scripting language inside of Unreal, you still have to understand logic and understand a lot of different like technical principles in order to like utilize it in a way that isn't going to be um, cause issues with performance. So
Yeah, and they make completely different games as well, right? So I can understand why certain things within the engine would be prioritized over other things. Yeah.
And another big one is with modding. So Unreal
Yeah, of course.
is something that like they didn't have that built in from the very, very beginning, but with like Bethesda's, and a part of the reason why they, there was some internal discussion around whether they were going to switch to Unreal or if they were going to like keep. There was a lot of pressure internally to like push to Unreal, especially when like Nanite and Lumen and all these like amazing features were coming out. Like people were like, why don't we just use Unreal? But the real like reason that Bethesda pulls on to Creation Engine is because of all of the like modding capabilities and the entire modding community that's built around those tools and those systems. It would, it would make a whole lot of sense for Bethesda to switch over to any other engine because they've already built up a whole community that sustains, the success of their titles. So, yeah.
Mm. Now, you did like an insane crunch on Uncharted Lost Legacy, right?
Yeah, I would say that was probably one of my worst crunches.
Like, how long was it? Or how intense was it?
Well, so that originally was supposed to be a DLC. The way that it was initially pitched was that it was going
Yeah.
to be a DLC. And so I think at the time they had mapped like 9 months to finish this DLC. And then at some point, like a bunch of people went on vacation after Uncharted 4 shipped, and I'm trying to remember the timing here, but a bunch of people went off on vacation. A few of us that didn't take vacation right out of the gate stuck around, and that was including the modeler I worked with on Uncharted and Uncharted Lost Legacy. We decided we wanted to jump right into like building, kind of getting first pick at building something because we figured, well, we're here, we'll just start building stuff, and we'll get first dibs on whatever level we think is the coolest. And at the time, the game was actually supposed to be like it was pitched to be in China, somewhere in China, and so we started building out all these temples and that were like Chinese temples, and having a lot of fun with like new techniques, new workflows, and just having a good time with it. And then about a month or two in, they pivoted to having the setting in India. So we're like, all right, well, I guess we're pivoting to a very different look with the temples that we were prototyping out. And so, we kind of ended up losing a couple months off of that schedule because of that pivot. And then once they started realizing that the scope of Lost Legacy was comparable to like the first Uncharted, somewhere between like the first and second Uncharted, they were like, oh, maybe we should be pitching this as like, or like marketing this as like a standalone title. And so that's what they did. They kind of pivoted to, now it's a standalone title, but they didn't extend the deadline significantly to like make up for that. So we were all just like killing ourselves to get it out
Why
there.
would they not do that? Why would they not extend the deadline? Was there a particular reason that they told you?
Well, they did end up extending it by like 5 weeks, I think, at the end. But they don't, they don't tell you until you get right up on it, and then they're like, oh, somebody give us, 5 more weeks or whatever, instead of like right out of the gate, like acknowledging that okay, maybe we were thinking about the scope of this incorrectly and we scheduled it incorrectly. instead they just kind of let the team assume that it's coming out when they said it's coming out. So we're all like, scrambling. And I had actually like requested time off at the end of that production when it was supposed to end. And it was approved and everything. I'd bought the flight, and we get right up to the last minute, and I'm like questioning whether I should go on this trip. And the modeler I was working with and my lead was like, no, just go on the trip. But I felt like I was not in a good spot, like with the work that needed to get done. And so it was just incredibly stressful time when I was like, just like contemplating, like maybe I won't go on the trip. I'll just stay and like, continue cramming on these things. And it's I came back from that trip and they were like, oh, they moved the date again. They just kept moving the goalpost, and it was we were like, everybody was stretched so thin on that project, and they had kept typically they'll bring the whole team over to help out with, like, if they have two teams working on two different products, the team that's coming to the tail end of shipping a game, they'll bring some of the folks from the other game to come over and help out and just like get it over the finish line. But for whatever reason, they didn't do that. They kept the folks that are working on The Last of Us 2 on that project, and they just had everybody continue push forward with Lost Legacy. So that was another thing that I felt contributed to the kind of intense crunch that had happened to bring over like folks to help out. So yeah, I would say that at least for me personally was one of my worst crunches, and that's saying something, because I certainly crunched really hard on the other projects as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming here, but when you went on holiday, you couldn't really relax because you were just thinking about the crunch and letting your team down in the back of your mind?
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. You can talk to my spouse about that. She remembers clearly. I was texting the modeler that I worked with just to like check in and see how things are going, like, and he's like, stop texting, like there's nothing you could do right now. Like, just try to enjoy your time. And yeah, so it certainly made it difficult when I was just feeling anxious and felt like I shouldn't be on vacation. I should be there like with the team. So
yeah. I saw your work on the Shiva temple on your art station, which looks amazing, by the way. But how do you go about working on stuff like that? I guess you just look at reference footage, like a lot of stuff in Google. I mean, they're not going to send you to India to look at this stuff, are they?
No, that would be nice, but no. Yeah, just tons of photo reference. Other like temples that exist in real life, you're kind of pulling elements of bits and pieces of them. It's not modeled off of any one particular one. We don't want it to be like, oh, that's very specifically, it has to be believable, but we want it to be in the realm of like, fiction, essentially. So, pulling as much reference, trying to find common motifs that you can kind of reuse. And then just, like starting to sculpt those things and get loose shapes put in place and blocking out, the layout. I mean, we get a layout from design, so it'll just be like gray block, that kind of establishes the flow of the level. But when it comes to kind of medium-sized shapes and the smaller and obviously like the finer details, the artists get to determine what that is, as long as it doesn't, obstruct any of the gameplay beats or messes with pacing or anything like that. So as long as you're working closely with the designer to make sure that the needs of whatever's happening in that area from a design standpoint is supported.
How do you feel about remasters, right? The reason why I ask is obviously you worked on The Last of Us, and then there's The Last of Us Remastered and The Last of Us Part 1. And in those cases, the artists are essentially, they're painting over the top of your work. Because I've spoken to many artists about this, and they have different views on it. Some are like, yes, go for it. I was limited at the time. So I'd like to see what someone else does with my art. And then there's some people who are like, no, they painted over the top of my art. It's not my art anymore. So what's your feeling about it?
I don't feel precious about any of the work that I've done. I mean, because honestly, it's not my art. It's Sony owns that art, right? So, um, but yeah, I don't feel any kind of like, I don't know, like frustration or being upset that somebody's coming in and like remaking those areas. I think it makes sense. I mean, if anybody wants to go and play the original, that's there. But for newer hardware, new tools, new workflows that exist, like why not? Why not kind of give it a facelift? So, um, I mean, it makes sense to me from a business standpoint. Like I understand why studios do it. Um, and I guess the way I think of it is, it's not my art. Like it's like I was hired to provide a service. That's what I did. I it's great that other artists get to come in and kind of like have their own take on it. So I don't know. I guess I don't feel as like I don't know.
I think as long as the original is still available, right? Like
Yeah,
if somebody, I think, because when I spoke to Benson, he was very vocal about not being for it, and I think the big reason was because they took The Last of Us Part 2 tech, they implemented it into Last of Us Part 1, and as a result, hit delete on a lot of his design work. And he feels that like Sony, for example, are very much pushing the remaster, and like you don't even have access to the original anymore as and I think it was more so like, hey, if I want to get my son to play this one day, they can only play the remaster. So that's why I just thought it was interesting, because his is from a design standpoint and yours is from an art standpoint. So
yeah,
that's why I wanted to
that's
get your thoughts on it.
interesting point there. Yeah, especially with like modern hardware, if the ability to buy the original version isn't there, that kind of sucks. But um, yeah, because newer generations that would be coming in to play the game wouldn't see how it was originally intended. But I don't know. I struggle with this as well because I'll go back and play old games that I loved growing up, and they don't hold up. If you know what I mean? And so it's like I would, I struggle with that. Would somebody go back and play The Last of Us and be like, oh, this feels dated, and they're like, why was this so great, right? Uh, Without the context of like when tools and hardware were limited, right? This was like kind of set the bar. But now, if somebody that's younger jumps in and starts playing the remastered version, they're like, oh, this feels great. It has kind of all the like modern um, features and the feel, and like all the new tech that's in it. They may come away with a more like positive view on the game than they would if it was like the older version. I don't know. It's hard to say. Even though like retro games are coming back and people are playing them more and more now. Um, I don't know. I can see it from both sides. I think that Sony
Yeah.
should offer both. Like if you want the original, you can buy the original. If you want to play the remastered, you can play the remastered, regardless of like what hardware generation we're on.
Yeah, and maybe they're sitting on some data that indicates that, I don't know, the original might eat into sales for the new one. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
One theory.
right? Like all that money goes to them regardless. Um, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about the fact that the original one isn't available. Like if you were to load up, the like uh PlayStation's storefront and you look for Last of Us, like the first one, like the remastered version would probably be what's shown first. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if you can buy the original. So
How was your experience working with Neil Druckmann? Because obviously you played a part, or you worked with him in regards to Riley, right?
mhm.
And you had a productive meeting, I suppose, with him. But what was your experience overall working with him?
Yeah, so for the DLC, I had moved on to Uncharted 4, and the one of the lead concept artists came over, and it was, she's a friend of mine, and we were talking, and she was like, "Oh, by the way, Neil might come by and like ask you some questions," because we were talking about character development stuff. So she kind of gave me a heads up. And then so when Neil asked if I would be interested in working with him on character development stuff for Riley, which is the secondary character that Ellie, Ellie's best friend slash like childhood, I guess like love interest. Um, I was like, really, me? Like, as a texture artist, I was like, that sounds awesome. I would love to help out with that.
Did you
Um,
have much of a relationship with Neil prior to that point?
no,
Had you
uh,
spoken to him much?
nope. I
No.
don't think I've ever had a conversation with him prior to that. So it was kind of like, oh, why does Neil want to talk to me? Like, what? What? Um, so yeah, I mean, it was, initially it was just like, wow, it's really cool, but also kind of like intimidating. But it ultimately ended up just being like conversations around like what, forms of media that portrayed stories about lesbians and, in positive ways, or, which turned out there weren't many of them at that time. So we ended up mostly having conversations around like my coming of age and what it was like for me, like growing up, uh, as a like closeted, queer kid, not having really anybody to talk to about it when I was growing up. So just having conversations around that, and then as production started moving forward, I was pulled in some of the conversations around like auditioning for the secondary character. He sent me like 10 different women that had auditioned for this particular role. It was just asking me like, oh, who are your top three, basically. And so, getting some input on that, being able to just have some like conversations on some of the moment to moment beats when Riley and Ellie are kind of hanging out in the mall, because there's some similarities with like my coming of age story in malls. So a lot of that kind of tracks. Um, and then, just like conversations at the end about the kiss, and just little bits and pieces here and there, as development went on. So it was a very interesting experience having that kind of exposure to the high level creative, when normally I would just be like heads down making art and not really getting that kind of exposure. So yeah, it ended up being really cool.
And you worked on The Last of Us Part 2 for about a year. Was it a similar sort of thing with The Last of Us Part 2? Did he seek you out at all or get
So
your views on anything?
when he pitched the main story for two while I was in the middle of that horrific crunch with Lost Legacy.
Mm.
And so there were a lot of things that I wanted to kind of gather my thoughts around, but I was just like so buried in work that I couldn't really give the headspace to have conversations with him about it. So it was basically like 2.5 months maybe before I was able to like collect my thoughts and what I thought about his initial pitch. And so I wrote down some concerns and things that I wanted to like talk to him about. And so when I had finished up the game, I'd asked if he'd go to lunch and chat about, some of the thoughts I had. Um, and some of it was around that initial trailer, that first trailer that they showed, with it was like at the dance with Riley, or not Riley. Wow, my brain is
Was it Dina?
Dina. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Dina, they're dancing and kind of talking, and I had some commentary on that particular scene, and at that point he's like, well, we've already shot all the mocap for it, so and we're not going to really have a chance to go back and change that before we have to like air this trailer.
What were the suggestions that you would have
um
made?
I was just like suggesting that the commentary about I wasn't convinced that these two women would be in the middle of this dance floor, like making out in the first place. Like, I think that if that was happening, like it would be kind of around the corner somewhere, like kind of out of eyesight of like the main dance floor. But that beat needed to be there. Like that needed to be there so that I don't know that dude's name. The guy that came up and ended up like
Oh
verbally
yeah, yeah.
assaulting Ellie. He's like, well, that needs to be there. Like, they need to be standing there so that can happen. And so it's just like conversations about, like, my whole concern was like making it feel like it is like something that would genuinely happen between two women. And so, I mean, at that point, it had just like too much time had already passed. They had already shot everything. They were moving forward. The whole pipeline was basically already moving, forward on that particular scene. So a lot of the other like input that I gave was around I mean, there's Lev, the trans character. Originally Lev was supposed to die earlier in the game, and so I was trying to advocate to like not have Lev go out that way. And so I was happy to see that Lev was one of the few few survivors at the end of Last of Us 2. Um, just kind of subtle things that like little moments and beats that would happen that I was like, oh, just this, if it was tweaked this way, it would feel more genuine, I guess. So that was always how I was approaching those conversations, was like, you know, if you want it to feel authentic, then here's my suggestions on this. But yeah, it was like a lot of the stuff he had already kind of had his mind set on, like certain things needing to happen because of other beats that happened. So it became like much harder to like come in after the fact and like make suggestions. But if it was subtle stuff that could change, then he was open to hearing it. But if it was something that would require, understandably, right? Like,
Yeah, if it was going to change the entire pipeline or set things back majorly,
yeah,
then of course not.
like
Yeah.
go in and completely reshoot, and all the like facial anim and everything would have to change. Like that would be a big cost to incur. So, um, where it made sense, we had conversations around it, and then I left shortly after that period because we were planning on moving back to the East Coast. So I knew that like I wasn't going to be there that whole production to kind of um, have those conversations over the long term. So I felt like I needed to just like dump it all out and be like, all right, here's all my thoughts. And then, I don't remember the timing of it, but I probably left like less than 6 months after that. So it was,
Was there any feeling within the studio at the time that Last of Us Part 2 was going to be controversial?
oh yeah. Yeah. Most of the studio is like, really? You're gonna, well, spoilers, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes. I think the studio is pretty split on like the outcome of what happens. Yes, absolutely. It was controversial internally too. So
I guess if there's one positive from it, I guess you can say the story is definitely not forgettable, right? You definitely remember the story.
mhm,
So
yeah.
as controversial as it is. So was the main reason that you left Naughty Dog primarily for family? Did the crunch on Lost Legacy play a part in that as well? Or was it just
I mean,
family?
yeah. It had been a conversation with my spouse for quite a while to move back to the East Coast. Like part of the plan of like moving out to LA to start at Naughty Dog was at some point we're gonna move back and like settle down and buy a house and start a family and that kind of thing. So that long term view had always been sitting there. But after Lost Legacy, it was starting to feel like it was time to kind of move on. But I did want to stick around on Last of Us 2 a little bit just to like play some sort of part in developing it and talking to Neil about some of the LGBTQ themes. Um, and mostly just to be able to say like, okay, I worked a
I worked on
considerable
this.
amount of time. Like if I had left, 6 months or 3 months into development, it wouldn't have felt as impactful. But I felt like I worked all the way up until the vertical slice, and then I left immediately after the vertical slice. Yeah.
So how are things going with Hawthorn? Like it blew up when with the trailer and everything. Obviously, you've got your own studio now, and especially in a time where there are so many layoffs, the industry seems to be in a dire place. How's everything going with the studio and the game?
Yeah, it's been,
in terms of the timeline,
it's been a crazy journey. If I would have known that it was going to be this winding to get this game out the door, I just assumed it was going to be a straightforward path of raising money, making the game, getting the game out the door. But we've been on this bootstrapping path for, since the inception of the studio, and it's been like it's like, I don't know, it's a lot of different emotions all kind of wrapped up into one, because it's, we're like excited and passionate about the thing that we're making, and we do get the autonomy and the creative freedom to do this the way that we want to do it without, a publisher or somebody telling us that we have to do certain things. So that part of it's nice. Obviously, being like this small team trying to build something very ambitious, we've had to be super sober with ourselves about what we can actually deliver on. We were thinking about this big grand scope game that would theoretically take tens of millions of dollars to make. And once we realized that the environment wasn't conducive to raising money for any new IP and a new project, we decided, okay, we're just gonna narrow our focus down on a particular subset of features that could be kind of its own standalone, and then we can expand on it after we get to early access. And so we've been very strategic about how we've been planning the game. So we're still thinking about and pitching this big idea of what the game will become, but we're having to kind of start small with what is essentially kind of the village life. So you've got these, Hawthorne is about anthropomorphic woodland animals in a fairy tale setting. So it's very much inspired by Victorian era fairy tales. So when you think about Andersen's stories and Brothers Grimm and Wind in the Willows, these kind of old classic fairy tale children's stories, that's kind of the setting that we're thinking of when we start developing out this game. And initially is this idea of you're an animal that is building up this village and you're meeting other animals, and it's, we're blending colony sim and life sim elements in there as well. So some of our comparison titles that we look at as inspiration is RimWorld for the colony sim side of it. It gets compared to Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley on the you have a village or a farm or whatever it is, and you're building it up over time, and you're building relationships with NPCs. That's the Stardew Valley side, and then it gets compared to Skyrim, mostly just because of our backgrounds as Bethesda developers, and we have Bruce Nesmith, who's the lead designer.
He's great.
Yeah.
I've spoken to him a number of times. He's a very wise man.
Yeah, he's great. So we, when the Microsoft acquisition happened, a bunch of us left, and I'd been poking him for a year, just trying to get him to come and just join and help out on the project. And eventually he agreed to it. He's somewhere between a consultant and a part-time person.
Because he's retired, basically, right?
Yeah,
or semi-retired. He's working on novels.
Yeah. He made it very clear to us that he's this is going to be your guys' game. I'll kind of act in a consulting kind of capacity and help out where I can. Yeah, his superpower is systems design, balancing systems. So Jason, my co-founder, has had conversations with him about systems and getting advice on stuff and kind of thinking about how he approaches systems design. And then once we have like the kind of core systems put together. We would have him do like a balancing pass on it to be like, how would you balance out this economy? What, like, what kind of things would you be thinking about? So that's kind of his role. I mean, he's touched pretty much every single Bethesda game,
Yeah.
every system in every Bethesda game. So he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to, just like gotchas that you don't really think about until you're in it and you're like, oh, I didn't think about how this system and this system and this system would butt up against each other and cause this weird thing to happen. But yeah, so I mean, just by nature of us being a bunch of Bethesda devs, we get that like Skyrim, uh, I guess, note kind of tied to us, which initially we were kind of crapping our pants a little bit because we knew that we weren't going to raise the money that we needed to make the big, ambitious Skyrim scoped game. And so when journalists came out and said, it's Skyrim meets Stardew Valley, we were like, oh no, like we're going to think this is like Skyrim scoped. Like that's going to be bad for us. But then, the more we did it, we're like, well, I mean, our big grand vision is closer to that. Like, and it is a good tagline. Like maybe we should just like roll with that. So that's kind of the struggle that we have right now, where it's like in our big grand vision, if we had all the money that we needed to make the thing, like, yes, we would feel confident in saying that like we would want this to be something of the scope that Skyrim would be. But where we are currently, because we are literally like self-funding and crowdfunding this project, we have to kind of focus around the village simulation, colony sim side of things, and then over time we'll expand out and build more of the adventure content. More, we'll add combat to the game. We're trying to be very strategic about how we scope the game up as we go.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah,
do you have any aspirations in terms of like a release date?
We don't have any announcements on release date. I mean, it's still up. I mean, it's in motion because we're actively planning our we're actually raising money. We are also in discussions about other alternatives. So, depending on what our funding situation is, the date changes. So, I mean, we're just constantly looking at how do we push the date out longer to give us more time? How do we, we always want more time to polish and add more content and make it more robust. So, whenever we are able to do that, we will take that opportunity if it makes sense for the project. If it, I will say one thing, we have gotten publishing offers, but we have turned them down or have like pushed back on some of the terms. And ultimately, we're not going to take a deal that we feel doesn't set the team up for success like in the future.
Yeah. Or compromises the game,
Yeah.
I suppose, as well. Yeah. And I suppose you can spin it into a positive, like some of the most creative problem solving comes from limitations. Some of the best games that were ever made were based on limitations, right? So
yeah,
that's your superpower in a way.
Yeah. I will say, coming from Naughty Dog and Bethesda, two very different studios, different philosophies, different cultures, very different types of games they make. Like, I feel like it's given me this really nice balanced view on like how to kind of take bits and pieces of each to kind of create something that hopefully blends hopefully what each of those studios succeed at. And I don't know, my hope is that we find kind of a nice baseline of polish and like vibe and experience that we want to like portray to the player. And it might be this kind of like tightly scoped thing, but that experience was so enjoyable and so unique that they're like, I'm here for the like long haul. And as we continue to expand out the game, it becomes the thing that like we all want it to be, which is like this big world that you can go out and adventure with your your friends or your like NPC companions, and you kind of get into these like misadventures and get into trouble and all sorts of like kind of strange happenings as you're out in the world. Those are the things that like open world sandboxes do really well with, like, these different systems and emergent gameplay, like, just kind of shows up, and we want to get there eventually. And that's the
You
stuff,
will. You
that's
will.
the stuff that we do really well, I would say. But we're having to focus on that, like, colony sim, life sim feeling first. And what we're hoping players will take away from that is that they establish this kind of peaceful village, and they get to know the characters that are there, and they actually care about them. And like, by the time we start adding more regions around the outskirts and add, you know, conflict or some sort of like problem for these inhabitants to solve, you're more invested in the characters, and you want to actually be there and protect them, and like, you know, save what you've built, right? So like, that's the hope, right? We build a vibe, people get in there and enjoy like the characters and what's there, and then we keep expanding it out, and it becomes more and more meaningful over time because you've kind of grown with it. So that's the hope.
Well, it's ambitious, and I'm rooting for you. I'm
Thanks.
sure it'll all work out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Appreciate it.
I know time's getting on, so I just had a few questions here from the community, if I can quickly ask you, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, this one here is from, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Niers Gov. What are the differences between, you've kind of covered this a little bit, what are the differences between Naughty Dog and Bethesda's environmental art kits pipeline? With a proper pipeline, would the creation engine be able to run assets at the level of Naughty Dog?
So Naughty Dog, it's a philosophy. So I think that's where the structural differences are. Like, Naughty Dog tends to be like perfection at all costs. They want every little nook and cranny to be highly polished. Bethesda is more of a like, just quantity, get stuff in. We can go back and make it look better later, even though you never do because there's never time to go back to anything. So it's a mindset that is very different between the two studios. Is Bethesda's tech capable of hitting the same kind of level of polish as Naughty Dog's tech? Yeah. I think the difference is the type of game, right? Like, Naughty Dog has a linear, it's a narrative, linear path through. They can kind of load and unload stuff in a very linear way. It's like, okay, we're no longer going to be using this section of the level and this logic. Like, it's all very bespoke. So you go from one section to the next section. All of that is like, I don't want to say all of it, but a lot of it on the design side is kind of unique to that moment. And then as soon as that beat's done, they unload that logic and then load in the next kind of bespoke section. So I would say there's very little reuse from like level to level at Naughty Dog. That's just the way that they've structured their teams. I mean, that might be changing now. I mean, I can say that that's how it's been up until at least The Last of Us 2. But at Bethesda, with these big open world games, you never know at any given point what thing is going to be kind of spawned into the world. So you can't possibly like know to load and unload certain sections or like certain game logic, because any new system that bumps up to something else would cause something to spawn, and it kind of creates this like chain reaction. So just a different kind of game. You're having to like think about performance differently for an open world game. So you can't really compare like apples and oranges, basically.
Yeah, I mean, some of the Bethesda devs have said to me, this is kind of like a motto of Todd Howard, is we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So you have to basically prioritize what is most important. And I imagine for both companies, the prioritization would be different based on the type of game that they're making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it does feel like Bethesda's trying to do everything. They get close to it. Yeah, I mean, Naughty Dog's like priority is the narrative. They want to tell a particular story, and so everything around gameplay supports that narrative. Bethesda, very very different experience. The player experience is very different. players have agency. Every player story is different. It's a sandbox, so you kind of make what you want of it.
Yeah. Did you meet Todd while you were there at all, or no?
Yeah. Todd was he was apparently was supposed to be in my interview, but was traveling, and then when I got back, he ran into me in the hallway and knew who I was, and I was like, "Oh, hi." He's like, said that he's I don't know, he wanted to go to lunch, so it was like me, my art director, our like senior producer, and Todd all went out to lunch. I don't know, after I'd been there for a week, and he actually was asking me a lot of questions about what it was like to work with Neil. Because I got the sense that he kind of either idolized Neil or wanted to kind of understand his process or something like that. So that was it took me by surprise, because I was like, oh, okay, so kind of, I don't know, felt like he was a bit of a fanboy on on Neil Druckmann, which was interesting. And then, you know, come to find out that like the I don't know if like the Fallout series discussions were happening at that point, but I'm pretty sure that like the HBO show had already shipped or had been announced or something like that. So I think there was a little bit of like, I don't know, maybe it's competition. I'm not sure what it was, but he was just asking a lot of questions of like what it was like working with Neil, and you know, what it was like working at Naughty Dog. And then I would run into him occasionally in the halls, and he'd ask how things are going with like the layered material system. Um, so yeah, I don't know Neil. I don't know Todd very well, but I did have a few occasions to talk to him. So yeah.
That's cool. Well, you've gotten to work under some pretty important people in the game industry.
I'm very fortunate like that. I don't know
Yeah.
why that's been the case, but it's I've gotten to work with a lot of really cool, talented people, a lot of awesome projects that like you know, I'm very thankful to be a part of. But it's yeah, I don't know. I feel like most of my career I've just been kind of like bumbling along until
Winging it.
yeah, I didn't really have any long-term plans up until I started getting it in my head that I was going to start a company. That became like the, you know, like a goal that I started reaching towards and actively preparing for. But up until that point, I was just like, I'm an artist, learning to be a better artist, and like perfectly happy being a cog in the wheel, and like spending all my free time like learning, like getting better in ZBrush and all these different tools and trying to become a better artist. And then at some point after the experience working with Neil, I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to be an art director, because that's as far as I worked out in my like career trajectory, is like someday, I don't know, 10, 15 years from now, I'll be an art director, but with no like concrete plan to like get there. It was just kind of like, you know, 5 years into my career, I'm like, oh, one day I'll get there. It's fine. I'm not focused on it right now. But around that time period, I started thinking about, you know, starting a studio. And it was really from the like idea of, after working with Neil, I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to be an art director, maybe I want to be like a creative director. But then you know, Naughty Dog was my dream company. I thought I was going to be there forever. So I was like, I'm not going to be creative director at Naughty Dog. That's crazy. Like, nobody leaves Naughty Dog. Like, how would that happen? So I guess I'll just have to start a company one day. And that was like how I thought I would become like a creative director. And then a couple years later, it just kept sticking in my head, and I kept thinking about it. And then by like 2016, I'd bought the domain name for Near Studios. I was like reading, I don't know, entrepreneur books and business books and marketing books. Yeah, just trying to prepare myself like however I thought I could. And so instead of, you know, spending my free time becoming a better artist, I was like trying to learn how to run a studio. And then nothing prepares you for it. It's still to this day, I feel like there's nothing that can prepare you for it. You just kind of jump into it. But yeah, it's been a crazy journey.
I know in another podcast you mentioned that one of the things you had to kind of pierce through was fear, right?
Mhm.
And I'm always envious and admire people that are able to pierce through fear and achieve something that they want to achieve, because it can paralyze you a lot of times. So
Yeah.
I hope you get time now and then to kind of reflect on everything that you've achieved. I know things are crazy for you at the moment, but
I mean, I do look back at like my biggest fear, which was really just thinking I wasn't going to get anybody to join me. I like that literally was my biggest fear. It wasn't like fear of failing,
why would you think that though?
studio shutting down or something like that. I just thought like nobody's going to want to join me on this. Like that was the fear. I was going to
But
feel.
where does that come from? Because obviously you're very talented, so I'm just curious as to why you would think nobody
Well,
would want to charge behind you.
think about that, like that time period. It was like 2021, 2022, all these big studios that were spinning out from like Riot, from Blizzard, it was all like executive producers and director, it was like high level people at these very, big successful studios that were like known for running some of the most like successful franchises. Meanwhile, I was just like a texture artist on the game, or I was just, an artist. So like I didn't have a title that would give me that kind of stature that somebody would be like, oh yeah, follow that person. So that was really, and then the imposter syndrome, of course, is part of it, where I'm like, I, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Like, who think, like, why do I think I can do this? Right? It's all your kind of like internal monologue. Um, I don't know. Like, if somebody, if it had been reversed, and one of my colleagues from Naughty Dog reached out and said, hey, join me on this thing. And I was working at like a steady job that this was before like shit hit the fan in the industry.
Yeah.
And somebody's like, hey, come like quit your job and join this risky startup with somebody who doesn't know how to run a company, like doesn't have any experience running a company. I'm not sure I would do that. So in my head, I'm
Fair
like,
enough.
nobody's going to do this. They would be crazy to do that. Like, so yeah, to me, it just seemed logical. And it was like a well-founded fear in my head. Like, I'm not going to find anybody that would join me on this. Um, I don't know. It was a weird time, and it's even weirder times now. But yeah, I think just
Well, at least you can say your life has never been boring.
that's true. No, yeah, I've never. I can say that. I feel like at no point in my life has my life been boring, but some of that good and some of that not so good. Um, but yeah, I think just having like colleagues that I've worked with that like trust the work that I do, like you know, I've always come through and delivered and that kind of thing. I think that's probably what initially carried it. And then as the vision became clearer and we were actually proving it out and doing it, and it's now a physical thing as opposed to just like words that I was saying or like a pitch deck. It becomes easier for people to kind of like conceptually understand where we're trying to go. So obviously having like a game that kind of sells itself makes it easier now. It was not easy. It took me 8 months before I found my co-founder. So um, this is
All good things take time. There you go.
indeed, yes, persistent.
Good way to spin it.
Yeah, you gotta really, really want it. So anybody out there that's considering starting a company, like you have to be like almost insanity levels of like obsession with starting a company. It shouldn't be just like on a whim, like, oh, maybe I think I want to do it. It's like, no, you've got to be like obsessed with the idea of doing it because otherwise you're not going to make it through. It's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. And there are definitely days where I'm, struggling through it, and I'll get a perfectly timed message from the community or a friend that I've worked with in the past that says something that's like encouraging, and it's like, "Oof, okay, I really needed that today." Like that, it was like a rough day. Um, so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I will say that, having gone through this for the last like almost 4 years now, I guess at this point. Um, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like this experience has been incredible. Uh, the team is amazing. Would do it. I would do all the hard parts 10 times over for this team. So I look back on it. I would do the whole thing over again. But it has been incredibly difficult. So, but we're in a good spot. The team's great. We actually have a really, really, really like amazing game. I'm so excited for people to get their hands on it and play it and contribute ideas and get feedback. I mean, that's another part of this is like we want to build it with the community. So we're getting there. We're getting close.
Yeah, it looks great and it looks ambitious.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the best, you and the whole team. And I'm sure once this is all over and you're at the top of the mountain and it's a huge success, everything will have been worth it.
That's a lot of pressure, but thank you.
I will wrap up there. I know you're busy and you've got many things to do. But if anybody wants to keep up to date with you and the studio and Hawthorn, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can join our Discord. It's a public Discord, so if you just search Hawthorn Discord, the invite will come up. You can join that. That's where you get the most kind of nitty-gritty development details. You can check out our website. It's www.playhawthorn.com. As always, wish listing it on Steam helps us out quite a bit to get visibility on the platform, and you'll get kind of all the like higher level updates there if that's just kind of like the easiest thing that you can do. For me personally, I don't really run any of my like personal social media stuff because I'm running all of the studio's social media and I don't have any.
Too busy.
But probably LinkedIn. I'd say LinkedIn's probably the best like public place to connect with me especially if you're a developer and you already have a LinkedIn. You can just search my name, Heather Cerlan, and I'm there.
Cool.
Add me.
Well, Heather, this has been a huge privilege. As I said before, it's always nice speaking to females. Too much testosterone on this show sometimes. So this has been a huge, huge privilege and pleasure talking to you. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Okay.
That is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.